against the evil that's plaguing our nation.
If you don't like abortion, don't have one.
The only thing that can be said to be objective truth is that there is no objective truth.
Like, you kill a baby fetus, the same thing as killing any old inanimate object.
I would argue that we certainly are not all created equal.
Mark is training a new generation of leaders.
To take on the culture of death and win.
You young people, it's your movement now. It's not your parents anymore.
The blood that is shed cries out to God from the ground for justice.
And now, here's Mark.
So how should Christians respond to the COVID-19 crisis? That's what we're going to be talking about today on the Mark Harrington Show with yours truly, your radio activist and voice of resistance, Mark Harrington. You can find out more about our radio program by going to markharrington.org. That's markharrington.org. And also, I am the president of Created Equal, the organization that raises up the next generation of leaders. We go to high school and college campuses all over the country debating abortion. And like many of us, we've had to pivot during this time because the colleges are closed, the high schools are closed because of COVID-19. But that does not stop the mission of Created Equal, and we're continuing to do what we can to defend the unborn. So we're going to be talking about COVID-19, and I've been discussing this over the last couple of weeks because, you know, what else is there going on in America right now? This is the big thing that we are facing. And Christians are trying to navigate these difficult waters. You know, it seems to be we're on one extreme or the other. And we're going to try to discern the right way forward today. Because what we're seeing across America now that there's this attempt to begin to open the economy, like the economy has ever really closed entirely, or open the country, which really the country never totally shut down. But having said that, there are protests, there are states and governors deciding to open up their economy again. And we want to talk about this today with my good friend Scott Klusendorf. And Scott's the president of Life Training Institute. And he recently, his article, his piece was published in the Christian Research Institute entitled COVID-19, Do Pro-Life Principles Require a Sustained Shutdown of the Economy? Who decides? Scott, thanks for being on the program today.
Great to be with you, Mark.
Listen, I mean, I saw this, the article that you wrote here on the Christian Research Journal, and obviously very impressed. I think it's a very scholarly piece dealing with this. I don't think a lot of Christians are even thinking in these terms. But what I'd like to do is there's several questions that you answer in this piece that I think are really key to Christians understanding what we should be doing during these times. And let me start out. I just want to quote, and you quote Russell Moore in your piece here, and I think it's instructive on how we can go about discussing this today. And you basically, Russell Moore, of course, is he's with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Council, and he was published in the New York Times. And he basically said that Christians need to virtually abandon any consideration of opening up the economy and remain sheltered in place. He says, and I quote, "Each human life is more significant than $1 trillion gross national product. Stocks and bonds are important, yes, but human beings are created in the image of God." Again, that's Russell Moore of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Council. And so I want to start out and just ask you, Scott, and this, this piece that you got published here at the Christian Research Journal. It sounds like what Moore is saying, that we have this dichotomy or this false choice between preserving life and opening the economy, or continuing to give people jobs and helping businesses have get back to work. Is there such a thing, or can can we, is it a false choice, I guess is the question. Because it sounds like to me what he's saying is we have to err on the side of life, quote unquote, which means that we need to keep the economy shut down.
Yeah, his response poisons the well because it presents a false choice. Look, pro-lifers who are concerned about the economy are not so heartless that we're going to throw Granny under the bus to save our stock market options. That's just silly, and it poisons the well. Rather, what we're saying as pro-lifers is this: given the pandemic we've been dealt, what is the best way to go to save the most number of lives? Is it to remain shut down in place, or is it to go ahead and open the economy and allow for people to get back to work, thus promoting the general good in a better way? That's really what we're arguing. We're not putting profits above lives. We're asking, how can we save lives given the pandemic we've been dealt?
My guest is Scott Klusendorf. He's the president of Life Training Institute, and you can find out more about his work by going to prolifetraining.org. And he was recently published in the Christian Research Journal. And you can find that article by going to my social media platforms. I have a link there. Or you can simply go to equip.org. That's equip.org. Scott, it seems to me that where I'm standing anyway, that a lot of Christians think that opening up the economy is, we're hardly even talking about that. And however, there are protests starting to mount across the country. People saying, no, I think we need to be opening the economy. And in your own home state there in Georgia, as you well know, your governor, Brian Kemp, has plans to reopen the economy, at least some of the non-essential businesses, at least they were considered non-essential at some point, like gyms and barbershops and those kinds of things. And yesterday at President Trump's daily press conference, he said he strongly disagrees with your governor. How do you see it? I mean, you're a resident there in Georgia. How do you see it?
Well, I hope the governor succeeds in opening up as much of the state as he can. And I'm disappointed the president threw the governor under the bus. Yeah. I think overall the president's done a good job leading this nation. So don't take that as a general critique. But in this case, I think he missed the point. And here's the point I think a lot of Christians miss. And I think it's a point that our president missed. There is a principle in philosophy known as the precautionary principle, and it goes like this, Mark. We should always aim to reduce a catastrophic event and get the reduction of that possibility as close to zero as possible. So in this case, with a virus that can develop into COVID-19, that can put lots of people at risk, and if you get it and you happen to have underlying medical conditions and you happen to be elderly, this can be a devastating illness to have. And so the precautionary principle would say we ought to do all we can to limit that catastrophic result from happening. And shelter in place guidelines certainly are consistent with that principle. But the precautionary principle points more than one way. It also points to the fact that if we shut down the economy, you also lose lives. You have increased suicides. You have increased loss of life longevity due to unemployment, things I document in my article. You have drug addictions that go up. You have poverty worldwide that goes up because economies are shut down. This too is a catastrophic result we ought to aim to minimize and get as close to zero as possible. So a Christian who looks at this and says, listen, I'm pro-life, is not necessarily inconsistent with his pro-life principles to say we need to talk about opening up the economy. You are not, when you make that suggestion, wrongly choosing profits over lives. You're asking the question, how can we best promote human flourishing, best promote the common good, and best save lives given this pandemic we've been dealt?
My guest again, Scott Klusendorf with Pro-Life Training. He's the president of Life Institute or Life Training Institute, and you can find out more by going to prolifetraining.org. And we're talking
Actually,
about
Mark,
this.
just one quick correction. That's actually prolifetraining.com.
.com. Sorry. Well, yeah, I
No
shouldn't
worries.
know that. I've only known you for 30 years.
No, that's all. It's a small thing.
It's a small thing, exactly. So he's published in the Christian Research Journal on this piece here, talking about whether a sustained shutdown of the economy follows our pro-life principles. And I really exhort everybody listening to this program to read this piece. It's on my social media platforms. I think you'll be challenged by it. We're not hearing a whole lot of this side of it, and I think it's important that we do. One thing in the piece that I think is very challenging, Scott, is, when this whole thing broke, in January, February, March, whatever, all these months now, we have Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, and we have our own here in our state of Ohio, we have Dr. Acton, and they're the experts, right? Supposedly. And, for the most part, I say, listen, they've done as good a job as you can imagine in trying to navigate these uncharted waters. I mean, we've never been down this road with this type of a virus and pandemic. But what you bring up in this piece, I think, is really challenging to us. And that is, and I want to ask you this question: do doctors have a corner on how we structure society during this pandemic, or can we listen to other voices? Because I think what we're finding is we listen to the doctors and we just follow, and we're not thinking about the implications that these the positions that they're taking might have in the overall scheme of things in the country. And I think that's a very challenging thought, because obviously we should be listening to our experts.
Well, you're exactly right, Mark. Doctors absolutely have the authority to tell us how a disease works on the human body and what treatments are best for treating the human body against that disease. I'm not one of those who says, listen, doctors, we shouldn't even be listening to them. They're overreaching. Well, they may be overreaching, but they still are a valuable voice in this discussion, and we'd be in a world of hurt without them. So let's not be too quick to throw the doctors under the bus, but you are absolutely right. There are limits to what they can bring to this discussion. There are philosophical questions that go beyond a doctor's ability to give expert advice. And telling us what we should do with the economy is one of the areas where they go way beyond their field of expertise. Look, a physician would never allow an experimental treatment for some disease if it hadn't been tested for a number of years, in some cases tested for decades, before they will accept it as a safe alternative to treating a disease. And yet doctors with no experience in philosophy, no experience in economics, are then telling the nation you have to adopt draconian economic policies that put millions of lives at risk. And these doctors are overreaching. They do not have the authority, the academic credentials to make such a claim. And the reason why it sounds plausible to so many Americans, Mark, is that our culture has bought a worldview known as scientism. Scientism basically says that the only truth that counts objectively is science. Everything else is mere personal opinion. If you can't taste it, feel it, see it, hear it, or touch it, it's not real. The only thing that counts is science. Now, of course, that's not science. That's actually philosophy masquerading as science, because what scientism is really doing is putting a worldview in play. And that worldview is the only thing counts is the hard sciences. So it's very easy to understand why so many of our fellow citizens would say, well, just listen to the doctors. They know best. Well, they do know best about treating disease. They do know best about how to cure its impact on the body. They do not know best, or I should say, they don't have any more authority than anybody else about what we ought to do in terms of structuring society in the face of a pandemic.
Having said that, Scott, there are a lot of experts that don't agree with the experts that you're seeing on TV, like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. there are a lot on the other side saying this whole stay-at-home thing, the shelter in place, is actually fueling or at least not doing what they said it was going to do, and causing more problems. Where do you stand on that? I know you're not a you're not a medical doctor or expert on medicine and all that, but I kind of, I look at this and we say, we're locking down the country and not leaving our homes. We shut down all these businesses. There are a lot of other experts, medical people too, that say that was the wrong move.
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm not qualified to comment on how the disease spreads, but I'm as qualified as anybody else to give my take on what we do in terms of structuring society. And I think there have been some disastrous results that have happened, and I outline them in the article as a result of these shutdowns. I mean, Delta Airlines slashing 85% of its capacity. As of right now, 33,000 employees in my hometown with the world's biggest airline on unpaid leave due to this. Then you look around the country and you look at the estimates coming from the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis, and they are estimating we might be looking at 47 million unemployed Americans. Now, Dr. Fauci says, well, that's an inconvenience. We just have to accept it. Excuse me, that's not an inconvenience. That is an unmitigated disaster that has dramatic and negative impact on human life. And that's where I think doctors get tunnel vision. They tend to look at things strictly through the narrow lens of their own profession, and they lack the intellectual tools to look at this in a broader perspective. And that's why in the article, I argue that we need to have voices beyond the hard sciences weighing in on how we respond to this pandemic.
My guest is Scott Klusendorf. You can go to prolifetraining.com, prolifetraining.com to find out more. He's the president of Life Training Institute and has published this article in the Christian Research Journal about the implications of a continued lockdown on human life. Scott, I want you to comment on the so-called protesters, if you want to call them that, that are, raising their voices at state houses around the country. This Saturday, we have a large protest here in Ohio. And these are people that are unemployed. They're losing their businesses, and they're coming out and saying they want the economy opened back up. They want their jobs back.
Right.
And what I find is, you get mostly the mainstream media trashing them and telling them, they need to follow the experts. These aren't just protesters. These are basically good, hardworking Americans who just want to get back to work. Where do you stand on all of that?
Well, again, my article doesn't deal with the religious liberty aspect of it or First Amendment aspect of this, though it's an important part of it. In my piece, I'm strictly dealing with two questions. Do doctors have primacy in setting public policy in the face of a pandemic? And do we violate pro-life principles for arguing that we need to open up the economy? But since you asked, I'm with the protesters who want to go back to work. Look, it's real easy for people who are still getting paychecks from the government or who are in academia or who are in the media. They're getting paid. It's easy for them to sanctimoniously critique people who are wondering how they're going to feed their families tomorrow. And quite frankly, I understand where these people are coming from, and I get why they're there. They're not bad people. They just want to eat.
Exactly. And, for the most part, and I haven't seen any reports otherwise, these are basically civil demonstrations. They're expressing their free speech rights. They're petitioning their government. I mean, this is how we go about it. This is what we're supposed to do in America if we disagree. You might disagree with their position, but right now, as far as I can tell, they're behaving themselves pretty well, despite some of the pretty harsh measures that some of these states have and other law enforcement have brought upon law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, you're right. And there's actually a Christian critique of those protesters, which I think is quite bogus. And it basically tries to oversimplify things by saying, well, the Bible tells us we have to submit to authority. That, we're to respect the sovereign rulers God puts in place. Well, the problem with that is in a constitutional republic like ours, we, the people, are the sovereign.
We are.
So when we protest. We are participating in our government. We're not being unbiblical in that we're rejecting authority. And I think all Christians would agree that we ought to respect those God has put in place. But in a constitutional republic, we play a role in this. We are not passive subjects who wait from edicts from the king. We are participants in our own government, which is why we need to vote. That's why we need to do what we can to limit the evil of abortion politically. We have to do those things because we are the sovereign according to our nation's founding documents.
Amen, amen. And I've been supporting them as well because I think there's so many unknowns here, and I think we can open the economy, so to speak, and do it in a measured way, which is what I think the president's attempting to do, and many of these governors are.
They are.
You gotta feel for these folks who have lost their jobs, and a lot of them just lost, but their businesses. These are their livelihoods. They've spent, some of them, their entire lives building these small companies and these small businesses, and some of them may never open up again unless we get back to work.
That's exactly right. And if we really care about the poor, Mark,
yeah,
we're going to do more than just have a heart for the poor. We need to do what J. Wesley Richards recommends. We need to have a mind for the poor. We have to actually want to do what will help them. And lifting people out of poverty is a direct result of a market economy. When we have the economy doing well, and when that market economy is undergirded by the rule of law and moral principle, nothing does a better job of enhancing life's longevity, preserving human lives, and lifting people out of poverty. So as a Christian, I'm not callous because I want to get the economy going again. I realize that's the best formula for helping the poor and the vulnerable. And for people like Russell Moore and others to create this false dichotomy and demonize anybody who thinks the economy is important, I find it shameful, quite frankly.
Well, and I'm with you on that. And, I've been really silent about the spending that's been going on in Washington, D.C., and I don't want to go down this path necessarily, but I'm starting to raise my voice and say, we've already spent, almost $3 trillion, some of it to small businesses. That's fine. But they're talking about a fourth phase now. And I'm starting to think to myself, I think the so-called cure is going to be worse than the disease. We are now really entering into uncharted territory. We have never, ever we've never seen this kind of bailout, if you want to call it, in the history of our country. And the best way to get us back is to start giving people, to get them back to work.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your article here, Scott, these are the unknowns. See, we're not thinking about the economy being shut down and how that might increase the rates of suicide or poverty, gambling, depression, mental illness, elective surgeries. I mean, there have been people that are waiting for surgeries that you might say, you can call them elective, but certainly they aren't to them. But we're allowing for abortions.
Yeah.
If
And
you would, we
people
got about a minute left. If you would just kind of put a capstone on this. These are the things that are kind of the unknowns that we're starting to see now, the real costs of these shutdowns.
Oh, no doubt about it. People can't get surgeries they need to extend their lives. As of yesterday, the New York Times is now finally admitting that the shutdown of the economy could cost us millions in lost lives, and that we need to take a look at that. So everybody listening to us today, they can now rest easy if they want to open the economy, because the New York Times now gives you its blessing. But I think the biblical worldview is much more helpful here, and that is this: that when we participate in our own government, when we participate in a market economy, we're not being selfish and greedy. We are helping not only ourselves pursue intrinsic goods like feeding our families, like caring for our children, loving our neighbors through charity. We're also helping lift the poor out of desperate situations. And that's what it means to be a Christian. Do what has a mind for the poor, not what merely has a heart for the poor.
My guest today again has been Scott Klusendorf. He's the president of Life Training Institute, and you can find out more about Scott and his work in training up young people to articulate a pro-life position by going to prolifetraining.com. And you can also check out his article on the Christian Research Journal by going to equip.org or go to any one of my social media platforms, and we'll have a link to Scott's article there. We'll see you next time. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, America, to bless God.
You've been listening to Mark Harrington, your radio activist. For more information on how to become a witness against the evil plague in America, call Created Equal at 614-269-7808. That's 614-269-7808. Or go online to createdequal.net. Createdequal.net. Be sure to tune to the Mark Harrington Show next time for your marching orders in the culture war.